Well, the Ram Navami processions that led to communal violence across at least 6 states had a clear and disturbing pattern to them. The central idea, it would seem, was to humiliate Muslims, provoke members of the community to respond in some way, and then react with more violence. Hello and welcome. This is your weekly fix with me, Smitha Nair. In Raichur, Karnataka, videos show the mob leading the Ram Navami rally outside the Osmania Mosque, playing the song Banayenge Mandir on speakers. What's the song about? The music video on YouTube features the demolition of the Babri Masjid. In Shiliguri, West Bengal, we saw videos of a large Ram Navami procession that included women and children dancing to similar provocative chants. In Hyderabad, the Ram Navami procession that saw thousands of people in attendance, we had the BJP MLA Raja Singh trying to whip the crowds into some sort of a communal frenzy, singing a song. It had lyrics that went, Jo Ram ka naam na le, usko Bharat se bhagana hai. In Bihar's Muzaffarpur, we saw a mob brandishing swords outside a mosque and chanting menacingly. One of them then climbs atop the mosque wall to plant a saffron flag on the minaret. Violence had broken out earlier this month in Kiroli, Rajasthan during the Nav Samvatsar Yatra. My colleague Aishwarya interviewed some of them present at that rally. And among the bhakti or devotional songs, they tell her their favorite was Topi Wala or skull cap wearer's song. The reference to skull cap here is a reference to Muslims. Let me sample the lyrics for you, just a line. Jis din जाग उठा हिंदू तो ये अंजाम बोलेगा कि टोपी वाला सर झुका के श्री राम बोलेगा. You get the drift. In the Navratri procession earlier this month in Sitapur, Uttar Pradesh, Mahant Bajrang Muni Das can be seen speaking into a microphone outside of a mosque. He can be heard calling for the rape of Muslim women. Another video, purportedly of the same incident but from a different angle, shows four policemen in the frame. Three of them, in fact, are in the same vehicle as the Mahant bellows into that microphone where he says he would kidnap and rape Muslim women in public. It is the role of the police that we are focusing on today. Joining us, Dr. Meeran Borwankar, retired IPS officer. She's been former police commissioner, former DG of Police Research and Development. Importantly, Dr. Borwankar is also a lawyer. Also with us, Josy Joseph, India's preeminent investigative journalist. He's also author of The Silent Coup, a history of India's deep state that explores the government's abuse of police and security agencies and the lengths to which these agencies go to obey their political masters. Thank you for making the time for speaking to us here at Scroll. Dr. Borwankar, straight away, can you, to begin with, share your analysis of the handling of these various events by the police force of the various states?
So I don't have an inside knowledge about how a particular state police has reacted, and our audience must know that police is a state subject. So it's not ruled or it's not directly under the central government of India. But the overall trend, as you have said in your introduction itself, is that khaki, instead of being neutral, it's being tilted towards a particular religion, and that the earlier message which we got during our training or which we shared with our officers was that peace at all costs and that no community to be favored. Communal riots means that local police intelligence and local policing has failed. All these are fading away, and a constabulary which comes from the grassroots levels and even officers are getting swayed by messages against the minorities. So that is the clear trend, very unfortunate one that I am observing, and I'm sure all of us are observing with distress.
Right. Dr. Borwankar, you're someone who has your ears close to the ground. Would you be able to tell us whether this unprofessionalism in the police force, if I can characterize it as such, is due to inherent bias within the police against perhaps the minority community, or does it have more to do with what they perceive to be orders coming from their political masters?
Some kind of inherent prejudice I saw when I was in service. In 1993, during the Mumbai blast, some of our staff operating the wirelesses of the police mobile vehicles had come out with some kind of very unprofessional observations, messages, the way they held the wireless and they spoke about the Muslim community sometimes was absolutely not done. So action was taken, and a clear message was given that you cannot, once in uniform, you cannot behave like that. And each mobile was identified, action taken, and in future also anyone who was operating a wireless set coming out with some messages would be held responsible. That was the clear message given to police staff, which even in 1993-94 used to some extent get swayed by religious feelings. But today the atmosphere is that this is the normal, this is the norm, and that's what is very dangerous for us as police professionals.
Right. Josy Joseph, you've said, in fact, you've said this time and again that it is nobody's case that what we're seeing play out today has sort of happened post 2014. Much of this we've seen happen post independent 70s, 80s. You've extensively documented that in your book, The Silent Coup, as well. Your book, though, ends with that particular sort of ominous scene of Kapil Mishra standing next to a top cop from Delhi, and in absolute sort of disdain and disregard for the police, actually saying that if our demand to clear the streets of CDA protesters aren't followed, then you watch what we do. And then you say, sort of very pithily, that the riots happened right after, as the policeman walks out of the frame. Since then, you have been seeing what's been happening around the country. Can you reflect on the role of the police in the Delhi riots and what we've seen in the cases that I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast? I think you've muted your mic. Can you unmute
Sorry,
yourself for
sorry,
us?
sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Smitha, we should not forget the fact that historically, police force has been an agent of the political masters since the British Empire times, and we haven't done enough to reform that structural issue. And so the police at the state level and at various levels is incentivized to serve the political masters of the day at all levels, and that's an incentive that the Supreme Court has desperately failed to refine and reform. Uh, what is happening now since Modi came to power is that Mr. Narendra Modi has perfected a certain uh, uh, model in Gujarat of using police to create narratives and to amplify a certain political message, and that is a silent communication that has gone out across this country. And police, as I said in my book, is now actively available in most parts of the country to subvert democracy and the constitution, and they're the stormtroopers on the field. This is not going to change until and unless uh, the courts intervene, because the media has failed and media has been completely tamed, except for some marginal smaller publications like Scroll, or I mean the new ones. I think what we are witnessing is beyond just lack of discipline and neutrality that ma'am was talking about, is that the police is now finally an active agent in the creation of a majoritarian politics. And in that creation of the majoritarian state, a certain level of violence, dehumanizing of Muslims and other minorities is very crucial. Without those enemies, that majoritarian narrative doesn't hold up, because there is nothing that is positive about that narrative. And in creating that enemy, especially the dehumanized Muslim, the police is now the most crucial part. In fact, they're as important, if not more, than the violent mobs, the delinquents that are on the streets. That's what we saw in Delhi riots. That's what we are seeing in across India, especially in BJP ruled states. I'm not saying that Congress or other opposition parties have been good at professionalizing the police, but in the BJP ruled states, for sure, that's what's happening.
Dr. Borwankar, you've been one of those few people, who have spoken on the record time and again over, your sort of discomfort with what has been happening. I want to ask you, in your conversations with those like you who've been in positions of power in the civil services, in the judiciary, in the IPS, what is the conversation like when you get together? What do those who are still in service tell you? Do you see this sort of? I mean, is it fair what how the characterization by Josy Joseph of how the police force largely is in the country today?
So I haven't read his book, but I must say that when I talk to civil servants, and I very often talk to both IPS, IAS officers, fortunately for the country and for our citizens, services, most of them and most of the serving officers are neutral and are have great respect for the Indian Constitution. And the academy, both in Missouri and NPA in Hyderabad, they instill such strong values system about the Constitution, which I think has held us very strongly at this particular juncture when the country is becoming unprofessional in its governance. But uh, about the field level officers, uh, I feel they are getting more influenced than officers who are critical in their thinking, and they at their level they do try to stop. But it's not only the BJP ruled states which are trying to use police, even in other states which are being ruled by other political parties, they also try to use police machinery, maybe not for the communal purposes, but for many other purposes, like I would say corruption. So senior level still is for the constitution, field level is getting emotionally involved, and for them the right seems to be uh, the right is what the majority wants.
I just
It's
want to add to what she
yeah,
said, Smita.
yeah.
It is not just about the emotional part of it. I mean, I think she's right when she says that most of our IPS officers and senior officers are quite committed to the constitution. But there is a very serious problem here, and which has is not just BJP's legacy, but historically of all the political parties. Uh, Policing has been incentivized in favor of those who are willing to implement the political agenda of the day. So, if you look at Gujarat, some of its finest IPS officers all finished off after the Gujarat riots, destroyed, and continues to be haunted. If you look across India, not just in BJP, other ruled states also, that has been the case. So, wherever we see honest professional policing, it is largely can be attributed to one officer or a few of them standing up in the face of confirmed destruction of their career and damage to their career. So
And that
police,
right. Go ahead.
yeah. So policing per se has been fully incentivized in favor of implementing the political agenda of the day. So you look at West Bengal, you look at Kerala, and I'm talking about these are opposition states, and you look at the BJP states everywhere. But unfortunate part in the BJP rule state is that it is part of a larger, broader, crude national mission for establishing a majoritarian state, and that is destroying the very way we have lived and we have dreamt of India.
Which is why I asked you the question, Dr. Borwankar, because I know for a fact, having reported from Mumbai when you were in service, that you were not very popular among the political class because you had sort of had a zero tolerance for political interference in policing. That was your image largely. Uh, but what are you hearing from those in service on the ground? I mean, is there resistance against uh, what is now largely acceptable, as you yourself said in your opening remarks?
Yeah, there is resistance at individual level, definitely. Some officers are even openly saying we don't mind what we call side postings, not very important executive postings, but we will not side with any order which we don't think is lawful order. But like said by the my fellow panelists, that if you want to be commissioner of police, if you want to be joint commissioner of police, they select only those officers who adhere to, who obey, and who implement the orders given by the ruling party, irrespective of which ruling party. So I was unpopular not only with BJP but with Congress, with NCP. So any officer who says that my loyalties towards the constitution is kept somewhere in the side, and those officers who are ready to accept the orders of the ruling party, irrespective of the party, they are brought to the center stage, they have the focus. But many officers today are ready to face not the wrath, but to accept side postings because they are not communal, they have not been trained to be communal, and they have strong feelings for the constitution.
Again, Smita, just to add to what ma'am said, if you look at the number of senior bureaucrats, IPS, IAS officers who have refused to come on central deputation under the new government is dramatic. And if you walk into the central government today, especially in the civil bureaucracy and even otherwise, you can see that the key posts are now taken up by people from other services. And government is desperately short of officers because, as what she said, individual officers are standing up for the constitution, refusing to be stormtroopers for a majoritarian state. But it is like you and all of us, they are all silent. It is a loud, thuggish minority which is now has taken over the the streets of this country.
But this is a question. In fact, one of our viewers had sent to me when we had the conversation earlier. If you remember on your book, Josy Joseph, this question is for you. Every time the police comes under scrutiny, we are told by well-wishers of the police that unless police reforms are implemented, unless there is political will to do that, we are not going to see very much change. Is it true that the police leadership is abjectly helpless and just cannot do anything unless these said police reforms are implemented? Or is there something that they can actually do and they aren't doing beyond just these sort of individual acts of protest?
I think ma'am is better placed to answer that question because she has all her career struggled with the political class. But I would say this: the ability of a police officer to uphold the constitution and to be neutral is very limited by the fact that their entire career is controlled by the politicians. And by now, Indian democracy, it's very clear that our political class, without any exception, is a threat to the very democratic idea of India. So unless you serve the political masses who are a threat to the democracy, the police officers can't think of calm sleep and good career, and that is where the entire problem begins. And in failing the idea of India, in failing all of us, failing these Muslims, failing all of us is our judiciary, and I hope they wake up. I mean, our Supreme Court has reduced itself to uh, an embarrassing sight in terms of upholding constitutional values. Unless court intervenes, that's a last refuge for us today. Unless the court intervenes, our police will continue to be communalized. The good officers will go silent, and I don't know where we will land up.
Right. Dr. Borwankar, I want to talk about civil society response to what has been happening. Now, you, along with some of the most respected names in the judiciary and civil services, came together to form the Citizens Committee on the Delhi riots, which is an independent probe panel set up by the Constitutional Conduct Group. If you could give me a second, I want to read what your statement said. The press statement said this has become, the setting up of this committee has become even more necessary as the investigation carried out into the riots by the Delhi police has evoked extensive critical commentary in recent times. Could you share with our viewers what you've been able to find so far, if at all? And also, if you could reflect on roles that organizations such as this could possibly play.
So I would reply the second question first, in the sense that I feel we have a limited role, but a very crucial role. And we would like that the committee report be read, discussed, reach not only the intellectuals, the higher echelons of civil services, but it should reach the masses. What communal atmosphere in the country is doing to the nation, to the citizens, to the minorities, even to the majority community. And second part, we have gone very deep into what happened before the riots, what was actually going on during the riots, police investigation, and UAPA. And we would also be coming out with conclusions. But at this stage, I would like to discuss the report because it's at the finalization stage. I think our success would be if our report and similar reports which are neutral are undertaken by uh, academicians, by civil servants not owing any loyalty to any
Perhaps the
political
courts?
party. I didn't get it.
Perhaps the courts as well. If suo motu cognizance is taken of the findings of a committee such as yours.
Yeah, courts, of course, but I'm just wondering, why can't we reach? Why are all our discussions confined to the limited audience? I would like this report to reach the citizens. I mean, like, it comes out so vividly how the riots seem to be um being planned, and as a uniformed police officer, I can see that they were preventable and how we failed to prevent them, and such a tragic loss of lives.
Right. Uh, Josy Joseph, when we talk about what can possibly be done, and I've asked you this question, I think, twice before. The two things that come from our conversations is, one is the diversity in police force, which is woefully inadequate representation of Muslims, of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, even OBCs to an extent. If you could, most people don't get why this diversity is not a symbolic thing. Can you explain why diversity in the police force is so significant, particularly in the climate that we are in today?
Yeah, what ma'am was earlier saying that because these policemen come from the local community, and since just about 1 to 2 to 3% of the police forces are only Muslims, the rest of it's a majoritarian force in that sense, and because of which a few things happen. One is that this majoritarian group has very misplaced notions of the other, and they don't have enough awareness of the Muslim community or the other minorities or the tribals, and they don't have the empathy for it, because policing is a great act of empathy. Policing is not an act of brutality. uh, and for empathy, you need information of others, and that's what at the heart of it. So if, for example, if we were to say that the police reforms do not happen, everything remains as it is, and there is a majoritarian agenda, etc., etc. But if the police force were a better reflection of our society, with larger number of Muslims, tribals, Dalits, etc., then this same very police, by the very sheer fact that they reflect the societies that they deal with, would be far more fair-handed. And that is a very crucial flow in the, and this can be fixed. These are all fixed. I mean, countries around the world have gone through these kinds of problems, and they're very simple. That's where I'm coming again and again, that I hope what the report that ma'am and team are making is read by the Supreme Court. I hope Supreme Court do not see, one of the traps of a majoritarian politics is that it likes a certain level of mild violence. The bushfires of violence, not a large scale riot. So when it is a bushfire of violence, it gives us Supreme Court or the judiciary the excuse, saying that, oh, it's a small violence, go to the High Court, go to the magistrate, etc. But that is where the visionaries, the statesmen, are called into act. And that is where the Supreme Court needs to wake up and say, look, there is a national pattern emerging and we need to intervene. And in that, they could please dust up that 2-decade-old orders on police reforms. It is all there. It is all written. It is a telling commentary that our political class is not going to allow police reforms, be it the Congress, be it the BJP, whoever it is. Because for all of them, police is a great tool of extending the state's monopoly over violence. You look at what's happening in Punjab. Aam Aadmi Party is filing police case in Punjab against Delhi BJP leaders. So nobody is an exception. But if the Supreme Court were to dust it up and say that this has to be implemented today, it can't wait for tomorrow, I think there is hope in it. I hope it happens. Otherwise, we would be, I mean, I don't know what we are headed for. Definitely not for a better tomorrow.
Right. If any of you who are watching us have questions for Dr. Borwankar of Josy Joseph, do send them in. Many of you are sending in comments. I'll not read some of them. Some of them are, please avoid abusing, as we often say. There's a comment by Soma Mandal Bamra, who says, disgusting policing in UP. Always knew it, as such people of Uttar Pradesh are largely casteist. Well, perhaps not the people, but certainly the police personnel seem to be sort of reflecting that. I suspect that comment is about the Mahant who called for the rape and kidnap of Muslim women in Sitapur of Uttar Pradesh, the video that has gone viral, and the Uttar Pradesh police that now claim that the matter is being investigated. Dr. Borwankar, we're sort of coming to the end of this conversation. I want to put to you a sort of a suggestion that was very forcefully put forth by Colin Gonsalves in an interview I did with him, the human rights lawyer. He was, of course, referring to the misuse of several laws, particularly anti-terror laws like UAPA, and the manner in which, in the indiscriminate manner in which they have been sort of applied. And he says that unless you have individual police officers or investigating officers or whichever agency it is held responsible by the court and asked to pay a fine, uh, uh, which is large enough, you wouldn't see malicious prosecution stop. So do you see that as perhaps one avenue that has not been explored enough by our courts, uh, in sort of putting an end to both malicious policing and malicious prosecution?
Courts, in fact, have a very powerful instrument in their hands, that is passing strictures against the investigating officer, even if they don't fine. If they pass stricture, action is taken, and police department is bound to take action against an IO. And what more do you want? The NCRB and other data available itself shows that conviction under UAPA or anti-terrorist laws is less than 5%. So it proves that many of our officers are using these acts, very stringent acts, not judiciously, and that are law officers who scrutinize the investigation conducted by the IO. He or she is also not applying the mind. The particular section of law can be deleted at a later stage in case an over enthusiastic officer has applied it wrongly. So I would say at this stage, courts, even if they come with strong strictures, it is enough. Fining an officer, well, if it is such a blatant misuse of his powers, which I feel are a little limited in the sense he has got the case scrutinized by a prosecutor, and it's also been seen and supervised by senior officers. So to hold only the IO responsible may not be correct, but passing strong strictures and ensuring that police takes action, which we do about those strictures, that I would appreciate uh, at this level. And also autonomy and diversity, just like Mr. Joseph said, these two, autonomy for police as an organization and diversity within police, along with empathy. Yes, every person in uniform should feel sensitive towards marginalized, weaker, vulnerable sections. Empathy, autonomy, and diversity with strong supervision by senior officers and courts. That could be a way out.
I just want to add, Smitha, you mentioned about Colin. I just want to bring to your attention, and I hope we discuss that more, that when judiciary does its job well, there can be police discipline and peace, and Manipur is a great example. And the fight back against the state-sponsored killings in Manipur, which happened a few decade and a half or so ago, it was Colin and team which led the fight, and the lawyers reached Supreme Court. Supreme Court appointed Justice Segde Commission, and today, if I'm not wrong, I think about 50 policemen are on trial, and that state has had a peaceful existence for last several years, ever since court intervened. So, if the court wants to do its job, I mean, it is too much to expect all our policemen to be brave and to stand up and to stand up for the constitution at the cost of their life and their career. But for the courts, it is their job to do, and whenever they have done their job, we have seen that policing has become fairer. Police has see, the moment you empower the police, they will do their job. Let's be honest about it. And the
Right.
courts
And
are
one
the
way of Right. And one way of doing that is perhaps by training. A question that sort of popped up on my screen. Chetan Kavane wants to ask Dr. Borwankar, ma'am, do you believe that the constabulary, you said it briefly, but I suppose it's a question that's being asked again. It is a constabulary that needs to be taught about constitutional values and trained better, perhaps. Is that one sort of at least clear way in which?
Yeah, constabulary, sub inspectors also. Constabulary and sub inspectors, yes, we should give them more understanding of constitution and how it's so valuable, and how by aligning themselves to the constitution, they are they are working for the nation and not by aligning themselves with any particular religion, that they are able to provide service to the nation. Yes, more constabulary and sub inspector level also.
Right. In conclusion, Josie, your book, which is essential reading, I would say, for everybody, The Silent Coup. It talks about India's deep state, is essential reading. And of course, so we hope to the report that is being prepared by the committee that Dr. Meeran Borwankar is a part of, and that is looking into the role of the police and the investigation into the Delhi riots is also read widely. But somehow one gets a sense that, we are preaching to the converted. And how
Yeah.
does one get this? Yes, how does one get this message across? I mean, unless you see some kind of political groundswell, to deal with an issue such as this, even on UAPA, one never really hears. This is never a campaign issue, right? One would imagine that issues such as this, which relate to everyday life of people such as you and I, and particularly of the marginalized and the minorities, would be a campaign issue, but it never does.
My response is, Smitha, there is a fundamental problem in the Indian democracy, which is that our political parties are mere electoral machines. They're fighting election to election. They don't have time for the state or the welfare of the people. Uh, and so the more money resources they collect, the better they get at elections. They win power to make more money to fight the next election, and that cycle is our curse. I'm not arguing for one nation, one election concept, but I'm just saying that. So politics as a mission for the betterment of society has disappeared from this country, and that is why I'm saying that political class is a threat to the maturing of Indian democracy.
In fact, I'm so distressed that I keep wondering whether we can have a democracy without political parties.
That is perhaps a debate for another time. But Dr. Borwankar, I want to thank you for at least telling us a bit about what the report or what your findings of your probe into the Delhi riots and the manner in which the different agencies conducted themselves is likely reflecting. We hope, as you said, that the report is, when it's finally out, is widely read. Josy Joseph, to you as well, thank you for what you do. And thank you for speaking to us here at Scroll.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.